Wait, he said that in public. Alright, I need you to picture this scene with me, because when I first heard this story, I actually paused and said, oh my god, this man is about to ruin his own life. You know how some disasters start quietly? Not with explosions, just one sentence that it should never have been said. This story starts at a backyard dinner party in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Chicago. You know the kind of place. Big houses, perfect lawns, everyone smiling politely while secretly competing over who has the nicest patio furniture. And hosting this beautiful dinner party are Daniel and Laura Carter. Now, from the outside, these two look like the perfect couple. Daniel is a successful real estate investor. Sharp suits, expensive watch, always talking about big deals. Laura is elegant, well-spoken, and the kind of woman neighbors describe as so graceful. Perfect house. Perfect lifestyle. But let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed that the couples who look the happiest in public sometimes have the biggest problems behind closed doors? Yeah, keep that thought, because what happened at this dinner table was wild. So the night is going great. Soft music playing, wine glasses clinking, everyone laughing. Daniel is sitting at the head of the table telling stories about business deals. And you know that one guy at every party who talks just a little too loud? Yeah, that's Daniel tonight. At some point he taps his wine glass. Clink, clink. Everyone turns to look at him. Now, normally when someone does this, they say something sweet like, I'm grateful for my wonderful wife. But no, not Daniel. This man decides to turn his toast into a comedy roast of his own wife. He raises his glass and says, everyone here knows I worked hard for everything I have. Okay, fair enough. People nod politely. Then he looks directly at Laura and says, and thank God Laura never had to survive in the real world. Some people laugh, but it's the uncomfortable laugh. You know the one. The, should we laugh? But Daniel isn't done. Oh no. This man keeps going. He shrugs and says, honestly, if she ever had to live without me. He pauses, looks around the table, then drops the line. She probably wouldn't last a week. Oh my God. When I heard that part, I literally said out loud, Sir, are you trying to get divorced tonight? Because that is a dangerous sentence to say in public. And the reactions around that table were hilarious and awkward at the same time. One guy is laughing way too hard like he's watching stand-up comedy. One woman suddenly becomes very interested in her salad. Another couple is exchanging that look that says, did this man really just say that? And Laura? She's smiling. But it's not a happy smile. It's that tight smile people wear when they're deciding whether to cry or flip the entire table over. And Daniel thinks he's killing it. He raises his glass again and says, well, good thing she married well. More laughter. Some real, some very forced. Now, pause right there. Let me ask you a serious question. Why do some people think humiliating their partner in public is funny? Because let me tell you something very important. Respect is oxygen in a relationship. Once you start choking the respect, the relationship slowly suffocates. And Daniel had no idea he was basically pouring gasoline on a fire. Now, here's the part that makes the story even more interesting. Across the yard, trimming the hedges quietly, was the gardener, a man named Marcus. And when Daniel said that line, she wouldn't last a week without me, Marcus actually stopped cutting the hedge, because even from across the yard you could hear the disrespect. And let me tell you something. Sometimes the only person who notices humiliation is the one who isn't laughing. Eventually the dinner party ends. Guests leave. Cars drive away. The backyard becomes quiet again. Laura steps outside onto the patio. And guess who is still there packing his tools? Marcus, the gardener. He looks up and says politely, "Good evening, ma'am." And you know what's interesting? The only person who treated her with quiet respect that entire night was the man trimming her bushes. Laura looks back at the big house. The house her husband believes she could never survive without. Then she looks back at Marcus, and a very dangerous thought enters her mind. The kind of thought that starts with a simple sentence.
This will teach him.
She thinks, this will teach him. And when I heard that part of the story, I said, oh no, oh no, no, no. Because whenever someone says, this will teach him, that's usually the moment the real trouble begins. This is how revenge starts. All right. So, after hearing what Daniel said at that dinner party, I already knew one thing. This story was not going to end peacefully. Because public humiliation inside a marriage, that stuff doesn't disappear the next morning. It sits in your mind. It replays. And every time you remember the laughter, it hurts a little more. Now, imagine waking up the next day in that same house. Same kitchen. Same marriage. Same person who embarrassed you in front of your neighbors. Yeah, awkward. The next morning, the Carter house looked perfectly normal. Sunlight coming through the kitchen windows, coffee brewing, birds outside. But the energy inside that house, completely different. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through emails like nothing had happened. You know those people who say something outrageous-y, then wake up the next day acting like everything is normal? Yeah, that's Daniel. He takes a sip of coffee and casually says, big meeting today. Laura nods quietly.
Big meeting
No
today.
smile. No conversation. Just silence. And let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how dangerous silence can be in a relationship? Because when someone stops arguing, sometimes it means they've already started mentally checking out. Daniel grabs his briefcase and heads for the door. Before leaving, he says the most predictable sentence in the history of bad apologies. Don't overthink what I said last night. It was just a joke. Oh my God. When I heard that part, I literally said, Sir, that's not an apology. That's the classic move people use when they don't want to admit they were wrong. It was just a joke. No accountability. No reflection. Just dismissal. Then Daniel leaves for work, and the house becomes quiet. Laura walks to the back window, and guess who's outside? Marcus, the gardener, mowing the lawn like a man who has no idea he's about to become part of someone else's revenge plan. Now, let me say something important here. Marcus didn't flirt. He didn't chase her. He didn't even know what was happening in Laura's mind, but sometimes when someone feels invisible in their marriage, the smallest amount of kindness can feel powerful. Laura grabs a bottle of lemonade and walks outside. Marcus shuts off the mower. Morning, ma'am, he says. She hands him the drink. You got here early? Marcus shrugs. Wanted to finish before the heat. They stand there quietly for a moment. Then Marcus says something simple. About last night. I'm sorry you had to hear that. And when I heard that part, I said, see, that's basic respect. He didn't insult Daniel. He didn't gossip. He just acknowledged that what happened was wrong. Laura looks towards the house. He always does that, she says. Marcus frowns. He shouldn't. 2 simple words. But imagine hearing that when you've spent years being dismissed. Over the next few days, something small begins happening. Laura starts bringing Marcus drinks while he works. Lemonade. Iced tea. Sometimes just water. At first, their conversations are short. Safe. But gradually, they get longer. They talk about simple things. Marcus tells her about growing up outside the city. How he started landscaping work when he was younger. Laura asks questions. And for the first time in a long time, someone actually listens when she speaks. Now, pause here. Let me ask you something. Do you see how dangerous this situation is becoming? Because emotional connection is often the first step before bigger mistakes. And that's exactly what's happening here. Meanwhile, Daniel is completely unaware. He leaves early, comes home late. When he is home, he's in his office or on his phone. And every time Laura talks to Marcus, a thought keeps growing in her mind. A dangerous thought. What would Daniel do if he saw this? What would happen if the man who thinks she depends on him suddenly realized she might not? And here's where the story takes a turn. One evening, Daniel comes home earlier than usual. He walks through the back door and sees something surprising. Laura and Marcus standing near the garden laughing. Now listen carefully. The laugh Laura gives in that moment? Daniel hasn't heard that laugh in a long time.
You two talk a lot.
Marcus straightens immediately. Evening, sir. Daniel nods. Marcus. Marcus gathers his tools and leaves. Then Daniel looks at Laura. You two talk a lot, he says. Laura shrugs. He works here. Daniel smirks. And that smirk, that confidence, it hits Laura harder than the insult did. Because Daniel doesn't look jealous. He doesn't look worried. He looks amused. Like the idea of competition is impossible. And when I heard that part, I said, oh no, this is about to get worse. Because when someone feels disrespected and the other person acts like they're untouchable, that's when revenge starts feeling like a good idea. Later that night, during another argument, Daniel says something that pushes everything further.
Without this life.
If you're unhappy, Laura, you're free to leave. She stares at him. You think I wouldn't? Daniel laughs. You wouldn't survive without this life. And there it is again. The arrogance. The certainty. The belief that she has no power. That night, Laura lies awake staring at the ceiling. And one thought keeps repeating in her mind. If Daniel believes she could never hurt him, maybe it's time he learns he's wrong. And when I heard that part, I said, oh my God, somebody stop this woman. Oh no, she actually did it. All right, this is the part of the story where I need everyone to take a deep breath. Because up to this point, Laura is still standing at a crossroads. She's angry. She feels humiliated. She wants revenge. But she still has a choice. She can step back. She can talk things through. She can leave the marriage if it's truly broken. But instead, she makes the decision that turns this story from relationship drama into life-changing consequences. And when I first heard this part, I literally said, oh no, she didn't. So after that argument with Daniel, something shifts inside Laura. She stops trying to explain her feelings, stops trying to get him to understand her. Instead, she becomes quieter, colder, more observant. And Daniel doesn't notice the change. You know why? Because when someone is convinced they're in control, so they stop paying attention to warning signs. Meanwhile, Marcus keeps showing up every morning to work. Truck in the driveway, lawnmower running, hedges getting trimmed, just doing his job. But the conversations between him and Laura are becoming different now. Less formal, less distant. One afternoon, Marcus is fixing the wooden railing on the back patio. Laura sits nearby watching him work. You're very quiet, she says. Marcus tightens a bolt. I try not to talk too much while I'm working. Laura smiles slightly. You can talk. Marcus looks up. About what? Laura glances toward the house. Anything. Now this next moment is important, because Marcus says something that should probably have stayed inside his head. You don't seem happy here, he says. Laura looks at him. That obvious? Marcus shrugs. You look different when your husband's around. Now, when I heard that part, I thought, oh boy, emotional boundaries are collapsing. Because he didn't flirt. He didn't make a move. But he noticed her. And sometimes, feeling seen is more powerful than being complimented. Laura asks quietly, what do you mean different? Marcus wipes his hands with a cloth. Like you're holding something back. Laura stares at him for a moment. No one has said that to her before. Not her husband. Not her friends. No one. And right there, something changes. A few days later, a storm rolls into the neighborhood. Dark clouds. Heavy rain. Thunder echoing through the sky. Marcus is still finishing work in the backyard when the rain suddenly starts pouring down. He runs to the covered patio, carrying his tools. Laura is already standing there watching the storm. They stand side by side, listening to the rain hitting the ground. For a few minutes, neither of them speaks. Then Marcus says something simple. "You deserve someone who actually notices you." And when I heard that line, I said,
You deserve someone who actually...
"Marcus, my guy, this is where you walk away." But he doesn't. And neither does Laura. The storm keeps pouring. The air feels heavy. And in that quiet moment, they cross the line. Now the story doesn't need dramatic detail, because the truth is simple. Laura sleeps with Marcus, the gardener, inside the house her husband pays for. And the moment I heard that part of the story, I literally said, this is going to explode. Because revenge often feels powerful in the moment, but the consequences don't show up immediately. They take time. Later that night, Marcus leaves the house. The rain has stopped. The street is quiet. Inside the kitchen, Laura stands by the sink, holding a glass of water. Her hands are shaking. Her heart is racing, because something inside her feels strange. Part of her knows she just made a huge mistake, but another part of her feels something else. Satisfaction. Power. For the first time since the dinner party humiliation, she feels like she took control. An hour later, Daniel comes home. He loosens his tie and walks into the kitchen. "Long day," he mutters. Laura watches him. And suddenly she asks a strange question. "You ever wonder what would happen if I stopped needing you?" Daniel looks up. "That's a weird question." Laura crosses her arms. "Is it?" Daniel laughs. "You like the life we have?" He gestures around the house. "You wouldn't give it up?" Laura stares at him. "And what if I wanted something else?" Daniel shrugs. "You'll get over whatever mood you're in." Then he heads upstairs. But before going, he turns and says the line that really seals the disaster. "You'll always come back to the same truth." Laura frowns. "What truth?" Daniel smiles confidently. "You need me." And when I heard that part of the story, I just shook my head. Because Daniel thinks he has already won. He thinks Laura will never cross the line. But Laura now carries a secret. A secret that could destroy the marriage instantly. And in that moment, she believes she has finally beaten him. She believes revenge worked. But here's the thing about revenge. The moment it feels like victory is usually the moment the real consequences start moving. Wait, she's what? All right, this is the moment in the story where everything stops being a revenge game and starts becoming real-life consequences. Because up until now, Laura thinks she has won. She embarrassed the man who embarrassed her. She crossed the line Daniel believed she would never cross. She proved she didn't need him. In her mind, the score is finally even. But here's something important I always tell people. Revenge feels powerful in the moment, but consequences arrive later. And when they arrive, they usually don't knock politely. They kick the door open. After the storm night, things at the Carter house became very tense. Marcus continued working there for a short time, but the energy between everyone had changed. Laura was carrying a secret. Marcus looked uncomfortable every time he came to work. And Daniel? Daniel started noticing small things. You know how your brain suddenly starts connecting dots? Little details that didn't seem important before suddenly feel suspicious. Marcus being around more often. Conversations stopping when he walked outside. The strange tension whenever the three of them were near each other. Eventually, Daniel realized something was wrong. And when he finally confronted Laura about Marcus, the truth came out. Now listen. The confrontation wasn't loud. There wasn't screaming. No dramatic throwing of furniture. Just a cold, heavy silence when Daniel understood what had happened. Marcus was fired immediately. "You're done here," Daniel said. Marcus didn't argue, didn't try to explain. He packed his tools quietly and left. And just like that, the man who accidentally became part of this revenge story disappeared. When I heard that part, I thought, well, that situation escalated quickly. But the real shock hadn't even happened yet. Now here's something strange about Daniel's reaction. You would expect rage, yelling, maybe breaking something. But instead, Daniel became very quiet. And sometimes, quiet anger is more terrifying than loud anger. He stopped arguing with Laura, stopped trying to fix the marriage, stopped trying at all. He started leaving earlier for work, coming home later. When he was inside the house, he barely spoke. It was like something inside him had simply shut off. And honestly, that silence made the whole house feel colder. Meanwhile, Laura was dealing with her own emotions. Part of her still believed the revenge was justified. Daniel humiliated her first. He disrespected her. He pushed her away emotionally. So in her mind, she had simply pushed back. But something else was beginning to creep in. Uneasiness. Because revenge doesn't always feel satisfying after the moment passes. Sometimes it just leaves behind a complicated mess. And then something happened that Laura never expected. One morning she woke up feeling nauseous. Not terribly sick, just a strange, uncomfortable feeling in her stomach. At first she ignored it. Maybe stress, maybe lack of sleep. But the next morning, it happened again. And the morning after that. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever had that moment where a terrible possibility pops into your head and you immediately say, "Nope, not even thinking about that"? Yeah, that's exactly what Laura did. But the thought refused to leave. She sat at the kitchen table staring at her coffee and thinking, what if? No, that couldn't be it. But the more she tried to ignore it, the louder the thought became. So, one afternoon, Laura drove to a pharmacy. And let me tell you something. Walking into a store to buy a pregnancy test when you're not ready for the answer is one of the most nerve-wracking experiences a person can have. You're holding a tiny box that could completely change your future. Laura paid for the test and rushed home. Daniel wasn't there. The house was quiet. She went upstairs to the bathroom, followed the instructions, placed the test on the sink, and waited. Those 2 minutes must have felt like 2 years. Laura paced the bathroom floor, her heart pounding. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe stress caused it. Maybe... The timer beeped. Time to check. She walked slowly toward the sink. And there it was. 2 lines. Clear. Unmistakable. Laura grabbed the counter as the realization hit her. She was pregnant. And the timing made one thing painfully obvious. The child wasn't Daniel's, because at that moment revenge stopped being temporary. It became permanent. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. This was a life-changing consequence. 3 lives were now tied to a decision that started with anger. Daniel's life, Laura's life, and the child's life. Later that evening, Daniel came home. Laura was waiting in the living room. The pregnancy test sat on the table. Daniel saw it immediately. "You're pregnant?" Laura nodded.
You're pregnant.
The room fell silent.
Is it
Then
mine?
Daniel asked the question both of them already knew the answer to. "Is it mine?" Laura didn't speak. She didn't need to. Daniel stepped back slowly and laughed bitterly. "So this is what your revenge turned into," Laura tried to explain. "I didn't think..." Daniel cut her off. "No, you didn't." Then he said something calm, something final. "I'm not raising another man's child." And just like that, the marriage ended. Because the moment revenge created something permanent, there was no way to undo it. The lesson nobody wanted, but both had to learn. All right, this is the part of the story that really made me sit back and think, because time has a strange way of calming everything down. The anger fades, the arguments fade, even the embarrassment slowly fades. But the lessons, those stay with you. And about 2 years after everything fell apart, Daniel and Laura were living completely different lives from the ones they once imagined. Laura's life had become simple. Not glamorous, not luxurious. Just simple. She lived in a small apartment on the second floor of an older building. Nothing fancy, no huge backyard, no elegant dinner parties. But every morning, something filled that apartment with life. A small boy running across the living room. "Mummy!" Her son. Energetic. Curious. Always asking questions. And when I heard that part, I thought something interesting. Despite everything that happened, the child was innocent. He didn't know the complicated story that brought him into the world. To him, Laura was simply Mum. And that responsibility changed Laura in ways she never expected. The anger she once carried slowly faded. In its place came patience, responsibility, and sometimes reflection. Because late at night when her son was asleep, Laura sometimes sat quietly thinking about the past. The dinner party, the humiliation, the storm, the revenge. And one thought returned again and again. Was it worth it? Meanwhile, Daniel's life still looked impressive on paper. His real estate business had grown even bigger. More deals, more properties, more success. From the outside, he still looked like the same confident, successful man everyone admired. But success doesn't always fill the empty spaces in life. Daniel still lived in the same modern apartment overlooking the city skyline. Beautiful view, tall windows, perfect furniture, and a lot of silence. Some evenings he sat by the window watching the traffic move through the streets below. And sometimes his mind drifted back to the past. Not the betrayal, not the arguments, but small memories. Laura laughing on a vacation, their early years together, the time before pride and resentment poisoned the relationship. And that's when Daniel started realizing something uncomfortable. Providing money wasn't the same thing as providing respect. And respect is what he slowly stopped giving. Now here's the moment in the story that really made me pause. One afternoon, Daniel stopped at a grocery store after work. Just a normal day. People pushing carts, kids running through the aisles. Nothing unusual. Then he heard a child's voice. "Mummy, look!" Daniel glanced down the aisle. And there she was, Laura, standing beside a shopping cart, next to a small boy. Now, imagine that moment. Two people who once shared a house, shared a marriage, shared years of life together, now standing in a grocery store like strangers. The little boy tugged Laura's sleeve. "Can we get this cereal?" Laura smiled. Maybe next time. Then she turned the cart and almost bumped into Daniel. They both stopped. And honestly, when I heard that part, I thought, oh wow, this is awkward. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the store continued around them, but the moment felt strangely quiet. The boy looked up at Daniel. "Mummy, who's that?" Laura hesitated, then said softly, "Someone I used to know." Daniel looked down at the boy. The child looked back at him curiously. No anger, no judgment, just curiosity. And something shifted quietly inside Daniel. Not resentment, not bitterness. Just acceptance. He looked back at Laura. "How have you been?" he asked. Laura nodded. "I'm doing all right." Daniel glanced at the boy. "And him?" Laura smiled gently. "He's doing very well." The boy tugged her sleeve again. "Mummy, can we go?" Laura nodded. "Yes." She pushed the cart forward. But before leaving, she looked back at Daniel and said something simple. "Take care of yourself." Daniel nodded. "You too." The boy waved as they walked away. Daniel waved back. And just like that, they disappeared down the aisle. Now, let's talk about the real lesson in this story. Because this situation didn't happen because of one mistake. It happened because of two dangerous things. Daniel's pride, Laura's revenge. Daniel believed money and success gave him the right to disrespect his wife. Laura believed revenge would restore her dignity. Both of them were wrong. And when pride and revenge collide, nobody really wins. That's the uncomfortable truth. Revenge might feel satisfying in the moment, but its consequences can last years, sometimes a lifetime. So the real lesson here is simple. Respect protects relationships. Communication protects marriages. But pride and revenge, those two things can destroy everything faster than people realize. And sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we only understand after everything has already changed.